is Yoshinobu Yamamoto's pitching motion, and it's not just elite. It's biomechanically perfect. When Yamamoto signed his $325 million deal with the Dodgers, people wondered, is a 5'10" pitcher really worth that much? The skeptics pointed to his height. They questioned his durability. They wondered if his success in Japan would translate to MLB. But here's what most people missed. Yamamoto doesn't succeed despite his size. He succeeds because his mechanics are so efficient that size becomes irrelevant. Today, we're breaking down the kinetic chain, the 6 phases that make Yamamoto's delivery one of the most mechanically perfect in baseball history. We're using actual biomechanical science, motion capture data, and force measurements to show you exactly why he never misses. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the Dodgers didn't overpay. They got a bargain. Let's get into it. First, you need to understand what the kinetic chain actually is, because this is the foundation of everything we're about to analyze. When a pitcher throws, energy doesn't just come from the arm. That's a common misconception that gets young pitchers hurt. The energy starts at the ground. It transfers through the back leg. It explodes through the hips. It rotates through the torso. Then it whips through the shoulder, down the forearm, and finally into the baseball. Think of it like dominoes, but each domino has to fall at exactly the right millisecond. Each segment has to fire in perfect sequence. If your hips rotate too early, you lose the torque. Too late, the arm has to compensate and you risk injury. Biomechanists have studied this for decades, and the numbers are clear. Elite pitchers have kinetic chain efficiency ratings between 82 and 88%. Yamamoto? He tests at 96% efficiency. That means only 4% of his energy is wasted. Everything else goes directly into the baseball. So let's break down all 6 phases and show you exactly how he does it. Phase 1, the windup. Now, this might seem like the least important phase, but it's actually where everything begins. Watch how Yamamoto sets up on the rubber. His feet are positioned precisely. His weight is centered directly over his back leg. His posture is upright but relaxed. Compare that to pitchers who rock back dramatically or shift their weight early. They're already bleeding energy before they even lift their leg. Yamamoto's stillness here is intentional. He's not just standing there. He's in a state of controlled potential energy. His balance point tests at 98.5%, meaning his center of mass barely shifts during this phase. That's top 1% in all of baseball. Here's why that matters. Every unnecessary movement creates inconsistency. If your starting position changes even slightly from pitch to pitch, your release point changes, your arm slot changes, everything downstream gets affected. Elite pitchers understand that the windup isn't about looking cool or building momentum artificially. It's about creating a repeatable starting point. And Yamamoto's windup? It's identical every single time. This is the foundation, and you can't build perfection on a shaky foundation. Phase 2, the leg lift. This is where Yamamoto loads the gun. And the details here are fascinating. His knee comes up to 94 centimeters, just over 3 feet. But here's what matters. It's perfectly vertical. Watch his hips. They maintain a 92-degree angle of flexion. His posture stays aligned over his back leg. His head doesn't drift forward, backward, or to either side. Why does this matter? Because physics. Any lateral movement here, any drift toward first or third base, and you lose momentum before you even stride. That energy is gone forever. But look at what else is happening during Yamamoto's leg lift. His hamstrings and glutes are loading. His core muscles are engaged. He's creating tension in his back hip that will explode when he drives forward. Research from the American Sports Medicine Institute shows that pitchers who maintain vertical balance during the leg lift generate 8 to 12% more ground force reaction in the next phase. Yamamoto lifts straight up. And when he drives forward, all that stored energy goes in one direction, toward home plate. But here's another critical detail. His eyes. Watch where Yamamoto is looking during his leg lift. Locked onto the target, his head is completely still. Compare that to pitchers whose head moves during the leg lift. They lose visual tracking of their target, which affects command. This is textbook biomechanics. Maximum efficiency, zero wasted energy, perfect balance. Phase 3, the stride. And this is where things get explosive. Yamamoto's stride length is 155 centimeters. That's 85% of his height. Research from Driveline Baseball shows that's the optimal ratio for power generation. Too short? You don't create enough momentum. Too long. You lose stability and your arm has to work harder. But the stride length isn't even the most impressive part. It's the ground force reaction. When Yamamoto drives off his back leg, force plate measurements show he generates 1.5 times his body weight in force through the ground. For context, average MLB pitchers generate about 1.2 times their body weight. That force transfers up through his leg into his hip and starts rotating his core at 42 degrees per second. Think about that. His back leg is literally launching him like a catapult. But here's where Yamamoto's mechanics get really special. Watch what happens when his front foot lands. His front leg is slightly flexed, about 15 degrees at the knee. This is crucial. If you land with a locked knee, you absorb too much force and lose power. If you land too bent, you can't create a stable front side. Yamamoto's front leg acts like a shock absorber that then becomes a wall. All that forward momentum, all that linear energy from his stride, it hits that front leg and converts into rotational torque. His hips now start rotating violently toward home plate. We're talking 500 to 700 degrees per second of hip rotation. And this creates what biomechanists call the separation. At the moment his front foot lands, Yamamoto's hips have already rotated 30 degrees toward home plate. But his shoulders? Still closed, still facing third base. This separation, this gap between hip and shoulder rotation, this is what creates the torque that will eventually whip his arm forward at incredible speed. Think of it like winding up a spring. The more you wind it, the more explosive the release. This is what separates good pitchers from great ones. Yamamoto doesn't just stride, he explodes. Phase 4, arm cocking. This is the most dangerous and most important phase. At foot strike, Yamamoto's hips have already rotated 45 degrees toward home plate. But his shoulders? Still closed. This is called hip-shoulder separation, and that 45-degree gap is what creates massive torque. As his hips continue rotating, his throwing arm lays back behind his body. His shoulder reaches 165 degrees of external rotation. That's elite-level flexibility, and it's critical, because the farther back the arm goes, the more elastic energy stores in the tendons and ligaments. Think of it like stretching a rubber band. The more you stretch it, the faster it snaps back. But here's where it gets interesting from a physics perspective. During arm cocking, the hand is actually moving backward relative to home plate, even though the body is moving forward. This creates what's called negative work. The arm is actively decelerating while the body accelerates. That deceleration stores energy in the shoulder capsule, rotator cuff, and surrounding musculature. Now here's the part that makes Yamamoto special. Watch his elbow height. His elbow is at the exact same height as his shoulder, creating what biomechanists call optimal leverage position. If the elbow drops too low, you lose velocity and put extra stress on the shoulder. If it's too high, you change your arm slot and lose command. Yamamoto's elbow height varies by less than 2 centimeters across different pitch types. That's insane consistency. And there's one more critical detail during this phase: his glove side. Watch how his glove pulls in tight to his chest. His lead elbow tucks in. His glove side shoulder actually pulls backward. This is called glove side connection, and it serves 2 purposes. 1. It creates even more torque by pulling the shoulders apart. 2. It stabilizes his spine and prevents his upper body from flying open too early. Average pitchers let their glove fly open. Elite pitchers pull it in. Yamamoto's arm cocking phase is textbook. Maximum layback, perfect elbow height, excellent glove side connection, and it sets up the fastest phase of all. Phase 5. Acceleration. This is where all that stored energy explodes. In just 50 milliseconds, that's 0.05 seconds, literally the blink of an eye, Yamamoto's arm goes from maximum external rotation to ball release. His forearm rotates internally at nearly 9,000 degrees per second. Let me put that in perspective. That's 25 full rotations per second. A Formula 1 engine redlines at about 15,000 RPM. That's 250 rotations per second, but distributed across 8 cylinders. Yamamoto's single forearm is rotating at speeds that rival precision machinery. This is faster than a tennis serve, faster than a golf swing, faster than a martial arts strike. It's one of the fastest recorded human movements in any sport. And here's the thing that most people don't understand. This speed doesn't come from his arm. It comes from the ground, from his legs, from his hips, from his core. Research shows that the legs generate about 50% of ball velocity. The torso and hips generate about 30%. The shoulder and arm? only 20%. The arm is just the last link in the chain, the whip at the end that transfers all that sequential energy into the baseball. Watch how each segment fires in perfect order. Back leg drives, hips rotate, torso follows, shoulders whip around, forearm snaps forward. Boom, 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 like falling dominoes, but at incredible speed. And here's another detail that makes Yamamoto special. At the moment of release, his wrist snaps forward, and his fingers apply backspin to the baseball. High-speed cameras show he generates between 2,200 and 2,400 ARPM on his four-seam fastball. That spin rate, combined with his 97 mile-per-hour velocity, creates what's called rise effect. The ball doesn't drop as much as hitters expect. And because his release point is so consistent, varying by only 2.1 centimeters across all pitches, hitters can't pick up what's coming until it's too late. When every link fires perfectly, you get 97 mile-per-hour fastballs from a guy who's 5 feet 10 inches. That's not arm strength, that's biomechanics. Phase 6, the follow-through. Now here's the phase most people ignore, but it might be the most important for longevity. After ball release, Yamamoto's arm is moving at incredible speed. We're talking about forces equivalent to the crash test ratings of a car accident. If he just stopped, the deceleration forces would literally tear his shoulder apart. Instead, watch how his arm continues forward in a controlled arc. His throwing arm crosses his body, his glove side pulls in, his back leg kicks through, his whole body rotates to absorb the force. Research from the American Sports Medicine Institute shows that efficient follow-through mechanics reduce stress on the UCL. That's the elbow ligament that gets reconstructed in Tommy John surgery, by up to 40% compared to average pitchers. Look at how Yamamoto's spine stays relatively straight through his follow-through. He doesn't hyperextend, he doesn't collapse to one side. That means the force is distributed evenly across multiple muscle groups instead of concentrating in vulnerable ligaments. This is why Yamamoto stays healthy, why he can throw 200 innings, why his velocity doesn't drop late in games. But there's another reason the follow-through matters: fielding position. Watch where Yamamoto finishes. He's balanced, he's athletic, he's ready to field a comebacker or cover first base. Compare that to pitchers who fall off the mound or finish with their momentum carrying them toward the dugout. The follow-through isn't an afterthought, it's injury prevention and defensive positioning built into the delivery. And it's the final proof that Yamamoto's mechanics aren't just effective, they're sustainable. So how does Yamamoto stack up against other elite pitchers? Let's compare him to some of the best mechanics in baseball. Release point consistency. Greg Maddux, 2.8 centimeters of variation. Clayton Kershaw, 2.4 centimeters. Yamamoto, 2.1 centimeters. Hip-shoulder separation at foot strike. Justin Verlander, 42 degrees. Garrett Cole, 44 degrees. Yamamoto, 45 degrees. Kinetic chain efficiency. Jacob deGrom, 89%. Sandy Alcantara, 86%. Yamamoto, 96%. Here's what this tells us. Yamamoto isn't just good. He's operating at a level of mechanical efficiency that's historically elite. And remember, he's doing this at 5 feet 10 inches. Taller pitchers have natural leverage advantages. Longer limbs create longer levers, which should generate more velocity with less effort. But Yamamoto has optimized every other aspect of his delivery so perfectly that height becomes irrelevant. He generates elite velocity through efficiency, not through size. That's not just impressive, that's biomechanically remarkable. So let's bring this all together. Why do Yamamoto's mechanics work so well? 1. Consistency. His release point varies by only 2.1 centimeters. His arm slot is identical. Batters can't tell what's coming until the ball is halfway to the plate. 2. Efficiency. 96% of his energy goes into the baseball. Nothing is wasted. 3. Sequential timing. Every segment fires at the exact millisecond it's supposed to. This isn't talent. It's thousands upon thousands of hours of repetition. 4. Injury prevention. His mechanics distribute force evenly across his body. No single joint or ligament is overstressed. 5. The high three-quarter arm slot. At 75 degrees, his release creates a natural downward plane. That makes his fastball look 2 to 3 miles per hour faster than radar gun readings. This is perceived velocity, and it's why batters are always late. 6. Adaptability. These same mechanics work for his fastball, splitter, curveball, and cutter. He doesn't tip pitches. He doesn't change his timing. Everything looks identical until the ball breaks. When people ask if Yoshinobu Yamamoto is worth $325 million, they're asking the wrong question. The real question is, how do you put a price on perfection? Every millimeter of his delivery is optimized. Every rotation is calculated. Every movement is efficient. This isn't just pitching. This is physics. This is biomechanics. This is thousands of hours of deliberate practice creating something that looks effortless. And when you break it down frame by frame, phase by phase, movement by movement, you realize you're not just watching a great pitcher. You're watching a biomechanical marvel, a machine built through dedication, refined through science, and perfected through repetition. A machine that never misses. That's the science behind Yoshinobu Yamamoto's perfect mechanics.
Today we're going to be breaking down Yoshinobu Yamamoto's training and mobility routine. This routine has gone viral and it's a very unique routine in a lot of respects, especially in the United States compared to what a lot of pitchers are doing here. So we're going to talk through that. I'm going to break down my reaction to each of those different training exercises that we've seen in some of those videos. And then I'm going to share some of the progressions and regressions that I would suggest for those of you who are interested in potentially dipping your toes into some of these types of training principles as well. First, if you're not familiar with Tread Athletics, I'm Ben Brewster, co-founder of Tread. We train thousands of high school, college, and pro pitchers all around the world. Let's dive in. So why are we breaking down Yamamoto's routine in the first place? Well, he's obviously an outlier when it comes to what he's able to do on the mound from a velocity generation standpoint relative to his size. He's listed at 5'10", 176 pounds, but his velocity is actually in the 73rd percentile. He's averaging over 95 miles an hour, touching 99 miles an hour. And according to his teammates who we've coached and talked to, he's actually closer to 5'8", 5'9" in their estimation. So he's an undersized guy throwing very, very hard, and he's doing a lot of unique things. So I want to just understand and dive into a little bit deeper, how might this training routine be contributing to his ability to throw so hard? And what can we learn from it? So we're going to discuss not just his throwing routine, how he does a lot of javelin type throws and drills, but also his mobility regimen. So he does a lot of javelin type mobility drills, back bends, extension based stuff, really unique stuff that a lot of you may not have seen before. And then we're also going to talk about why this may or may not be applicable to your specific situation. He's very, very meticulous about his training, about his preparation. He spends over 2 hours each day on this routine, and it's very, very similar each day. And so he's not only doing daily long toss out to 300 plus feet virtually every single day, but they've also never seen him lift weights. And so he's a guy who's not necessarily relying on being big and being very strong, but he's turning to these other avenues to try to tap into the velocity he's able to generate. So let's break down some of his javelin type drills. And first, I think the question to ask is, why did he start doing javelin throws in the first place? Now, he was quoted as saying that his elbow was hurting him, and so throwing a javelin was a way to take pressure off his arm. And so there's a couple ways that this could make sense as to why throwing a javelin seemed to take pressure off his arm. One is that some of these drills were just helping him learn how to sequence that energy more efficiently through his body. Maybe he was yanking into his arm a little bit soon, bypassing his lower half. The other piece is that throwing from an abbreviated position, so already starting with the arm up and roughly in plane, could potentially also take some stress off the arm. So ideally at landing, we want that elbow roughly in line with the shoulders, as opposed to being low, as opposed to being high. We also want that arm to be on time. So we don't want the arm down, elbow up, low, elbow not quite up. Ideally, we want the arm in plane. And so throwing a javelin, starting in that more abbreviated position, well, we'll talk about why I'm not necessarily a fan of the extension piece of it. It is going to get that elbow roughly in plane with the shoulders. So that could have been the other piece as to why it seemed to help him take pressure off his arm. And that was how he explained it. So we can go through this first drill that I've seen him do quite a bit. And that's the abbreviated rocker type throw. So you can see he's really exaggerating that load into the backside, feeling that energy transfer segmentally through the hips, through the spine, segment by segment, and then arm coming into the throw very, very late. So I think he's working on that segmental rotation. I think he's working on feeling that pec pull or the arm coming into the throw very late and just being along for the ride and flicking it from his lower half and from the ground, as opposed to the arm being the primary driver of the throw. I think he's working on that sequencing piece of it. But there's a couple of considerations here if you're thinking about maybe doing this yourself. One thing is that while this is a very, very specific drill that likely transfers very well to actually throwing a javelin very far, the planes are a little bit different from what we'd be doing off a mound. So again, he's throwing in a very uphill, exaggerated position. He's finding the back hip, and he's throwing an extremely extension dominant plane. Can we do something very similar? Can we find the back hip? Can we get the arm in plane? And can we actually direct it more downhill in a more specific way to pitching? Now, the drill that correlates best to this would be a lasso throw, where you're just taking a ball instead of a javelin. You're getting the arm in plane. You have more of a neutral wrist. You're still finding the back hip. You're still unloading segmentally. You're still feeling the pec pull, but now you're actually able to drive it downhill. You can even do it off a mound as well. So those are my considerations. I think there's value in terms of what he's doing. He's obviously getting a lot out of it, but that's how, if you're watching this video and you're thinking about doing something similar, I'd rather see somebody make it a little bit more pitching specific. So we take a look at one of the other main drills that he does. This is more of a one-step crow hop where he's just jumping through the front leg, landing, and throwing, still on a very uphill plane, still going for distance. And I think he's working here on momentum. I think he's working on direction. I think he's working on, again, feeling the lower half sequence properly and bring the arm into the throw very, very late and feeling that pec pull. Again, this is a very specific drill when it relates to javelin. This corresponds more so to long toss for pitchers. So it's not the most specific drill, but I still think he's getting a lot out of it. And his teammates told me he really focuses on the direction here. So he's a guy who at times will do this right alongside right on the foul line, and he'll be able to actually have that javelin land on the foul line 150, 200 feet away almost every time. And so I think he's getting a lot out of it, not just from maybe a sequencing standpoint and how he transfers energy segmentally through his body, but also a direction standpoint. So making sure that he's able to release in line and not missing wildly side to side. So it's possible he's getting a lot of benefit out of this from a command standpoint as well. And he is a guy with very, very good command off the mound as well. One thing worth mentioning here is that this is actually a good drill if you're trying to learn a crow hop for the first time. So if you're a guy who's trying to do pull downs and you're just tripping over yourself, working on this second to last step, it's called the penultimate step in javelin. It's that front foot lands, pulls you forward, and then you just land and throw. And so again, an easy way to teach it, once you kind of get the hang of finding that second to last step, pulling yourself forward and throwing, from there it's very easy to build into 2, 3, 4 steps, whatever it ends up being. You find the front foot and you go. So just another worthwhile tip if you're struggling with actual crow hop footwork yourself. He's able to feel and exaggerate the arm coming in to throw late because he's starting in that abbreviated position. But I would still prefer to see him, not him necessarily, but if you're thinking about doing this, prefer to see it done with a ball. And some of the reasons are, as we'll get into, I think a ball, you can more closely replicate the positions you're going to be getting into off the mound. So you can replicate that elbow flexion angle a little bit closer. You can replicate that wrist angle, keeping a neutral wrist a little bit better. You can replicate that arm angle a little bit better as well. So you could still go through, if you wanted to take the arm out of the throw, feel that pec pull, you could still go through the same exact drill with a ball. You could still go through a lasso throw with a ball. And so this takes me into kind of my other general thoughts on javelin throwing from here. So going back to what he said about how he felt like javelin throws took pressure off his arm and off his elbow specifically, a couple of reasons that might have been the case. One is that a lot of times if the arm is coming to the throw too soon, a lot of times that can put more load on the elbow because you're not actually using the lower half to effectively sequence energy up the chain. So it's possible that all the different javelin throw type drills and progressions that are focusing on using the lower half, using the legs, using the ground, it's possible that that was the main reason why he felt like his arm didn't have to work as hard. The other thing is it could have impacted his arm timing by starting with his arm already roughly in plane as far as the elbow in line with the shoulders. It's possible that his arm got into a better position at landing, and that helped him feel a little bit more sequenced and a little bit less load going through his elbow. So I think there's a lot of benefits to some of the javelin throws. There's a huge emphasis on lower half sequencing, which is great. There's a huge emphasis on scap retraction, on feeling the pec pull, which is great. There's an emphasis on gradually loading and progressing mobility, which we'll talk about. And then javelin training specifically, they also have a huge emphasis on strength training, on power development, which again, we're not going to get into as much in this video. But I think there's a lot of great stuff to learn from the javelin world specifically. Their entire sport is predicated upon how to better transfer energy through their body, how to throw and implement further and harder. So that being said, I think there's some cautionary factors just to watch out for, in my experience, if you're considering doing some of this stuff yourself. One is there's a potential for the elbow extension and wrist extension to bleed over into your delivery. So when you're throwing a javelin, you're not at that 9-degree position. You're not necessarily in that neutral wrist position. You're going to be biased more towards supination. Wrist is already going to be turned into supination. The elbow is going to be in more extension. And then as you accelerate, in a lot of cases, that wrist is going to be more extended too as you go into layback. And so all of these are things that we don't necessarily want to see with a baseball off the mount. So I think we need to be careful. If you start to see somebody who used to be here at landing, they start doing a bunch of javelin throws, and now they're here at landing, right? That's not necessarily an adjustment that we want to see. In Yamamoto's case, we don't see that. He picks up a baseball, he's perfectly on time, in plane, and the transfer is great for him. He's not seeing any of those positions bleed over negatively into his arm action, but it is just something to watch out for if you have had issues with that in the past. The other potential concern is if you only do javelin type throws, which don't require handbrake, and then you wonder why maybe it's not transferring as well to your delivery. Well, from the delivery, you have to start with your hands together. You have to go through an actual arm path. The glove arm has to work. And so it's just a little bit different starting with the arms already up in position in that extended supinated position than having to go through a handbrake. So making sure if this is somewhere in your routine, any sort of abbreviated type drill work, making sure we have a way to blend the full handbrake, the full arm action into your delivery as well. There's a risk of pushing and a linear path. So with a javelin, also with a football, by the way, some guys will take that implement and they'll try to dart throw it. They'll try to throw it like a spear. They'll try to push it and guide it. Ideally, what we want to see with a baseball is as that arm gets into position and the torso rotates, that arm is able to spiral and pull out and around wherever your trunk posture is. So if you're a higher trunk posture up here, that arm is able to spiral out, spiral out, spiral out. And so it's more like that whip-like mechanism. Again, some athletes will take implements like a javelin, implements like a football, and it becomes more of a direct, linear dart throwing acceleration, which is typically not what we want to see. Finally, just a word of caution, not just for javelin throwing, but if you're doing long toss in general, for lower slot guys, this can work somewhat counter to the planes of rotation that a lot of these guys need to work in. So long toss throwing in general is going to bias more of a north-south delivery. It's going to bias and select for the throws that carry further, that have better backspin, that have better vertical break, and that don't run or cut off to the side. So those are the types of throws that long toss is going to be able to be really helpful and reinforce. So if you're a low slot guy, very rotational guy, you get a lot of arm side run, you get a lot of sink, maybe you're a submarine guy. Again, long toss might start to creep your arm slot up. It might start to creep your efficiency up. It might start to get your hands more on top of the ball. So just watch out for that specifically, and just making sure that if you're going to long toss, that it lines up with the changes you're trying to see in your mechanics. If we take a look now at his long toss, the main thing I wanted to note here is that he's long tossing out of his delivery. I haven't found any videos of him actually doing his baseball throws in long toss from a curl hop. Maybe he does some, but I primarily see him long tossing out of his delivery. And I love this because I actually think this transfers a lot better for a lot of pitchers than purely doing your long toss from a curl hop or from a shuffle step and then hopping on the mound and expecting it to transfer 1-to-1. That was never my experience in my own career. I stumbled across this in college where I said, you know what, I feel like it transfers better just throwing out of my delivery. So I'm just going to throw out of my delivery out as far as I can go, work back in out of my delivery, and then hop on the mound. And I've just reinforced everything that I need to reinforce in long toss. And now I can hop on the mound and it feels like it transfers much more closely for me. So I was able to get out to, I think, 380 from a slide step when I was at my peak. And I felt like that transferred so much better than when I was just not sticking it up from a curl hop standpoint. So I love that he's doing that. I think a lot more athletes can consider doing that and play with that. Maybe you work out to as far as you can from a slide step. Maybe that's 280, maybe that's 300. And maybe then you do the final 10, 15 throws from a shuffle step. But you're still able to really pattern your entire delivery as you work out in long toss and get all the benefits of long toss, which is that immediate feedback you get from the ball flight, and then being able to work your way back in downhill on a line to get over your front side. So now let's touch on some of his mobility training, but first just a recap on how he creates velocity if you haven't watched the full mechanical breakdown. And so there's a few different ways to create velocity, right? You can be the guy who has a lot of mass. You can be the guy who uses range of motion and displacement. You can be the guy who is very, very explosive and fast twitch. They can close the gap really fast. And then obviously just better sequencing, how well you just like time everything up and sequence everything up from the ground up through your lower body, through your upper body. And so he's not a guy who is relying on the mass side of the velocity equation. He's much more relying on displacement and then the time piece. So being explosive and fast twitch, and then how long he can apply force to the baseball. So when we talk about displacement is really referring to when it comes to the acceleration phase of the throw, it's coming to how long can we apply force to the ball? That distance over which we can apply force to the ball, right? That's the displacement we're talking about here. So what goes into that? Well, separation, hip-shoulder separation, thoracic counter rotation, scap retraction, layback, extension, right? All these things help us hold on to the ball for longer and apply that force over a longer range of motion. So that's an explanation as to how somebody as small as Yamamoto, who's not a super, super strong guy from everything I come across, is still able to throw mid to upper 90s. So he's relying on mobility to increase that displacement part of the physics equation. And extension, again, is one way that he's able to really exaggerate that. His spine just has insane range of motion. I think genetically, first and foremost, but he's also continuing to reinforce that in some of these mobility routines. A couple quotes from his teammates. One of his teammates said, he catches momentum better than anyone I've ever seen. That more alludes to his sequencing is just very, very efficient, very, very smooth. Another said his lower half is much more mobile than anyone I've ever seen. Another one said they've never seen him touch a weight. We can safely assume that his strength is likely not top tier. That's likely not where he's generating most of this velocity from. When it comes to training the spine, recognizing the spine really has 3 planes of motion that we can work to improve. There's the sagittal plane. This is flexion and extension. There's the frontal plane. This is lateral flexion. and then there's the transverse plane, which is rotation. And so all three really come together to be able to create that wave of energy through the spine to properly segment the energy from the ground into rotation. And so there's a rotational piece to the spine, there's a side bending piece to the spine, and then there's the extension piece to the spine where that spine needs to be able to extend to deliver the arm, creating that wave up the body. So he really leverages rotation and extension exceptionally well in some of these exercises. And he uses these exercises to try to reinforce that. So here's the move you guys have probably seen. He has a ton of different variations of back bends. This is a common move in javelin circles, javelin training circles, because again, as we mentioned, any sort of uphill throwing, if you can't extend, you're really going to have a hard time getting to those uphill angles. And so they try to really leverage and focus and train this extension to a very, very extreme extent. So when it comes to some of these back bends, one thing to note, if you're a tighter mover, right, he genetically is already fairly loose and he's trying to improve this even further. But if you're a tight mover, trying to perfectly replicate some of the positions that he's getting into, you're probably not going to be able to. So you have to be really aware and not try to force positions when it comes to mobility training. Eventually, you might run into your own bony anatomy. And this is where a lot of the issues that we've seen in the past and heard from different athletes can arise. He is really trying to leverage and create as much extension globally as he can through this entire chain. So what's happening here as he presses up into these positions? One, wrist extension. He's putting his wrist in an end range position. He's getting full elbow extension. He's getting full shoulder flexion. So he's working on that overhead position all the way. He's getting thoracic extension. So his mid to upper back is extending super, super far. He's getting lumbar extension as well. And then he's getting hip extension as well. So all these things are working. He's getting this big global extension through his entire body. Now, I think you can really get a lot out of this and work to improve these positions. But a word of caution, the body's going to seek to get this range wherever it can get it. And so what we've heard stories of is athletes doing a ton of aggressive back bends and back bridges and running into stress fracture issues in their low back. And I think if you do this safely, you do this progressively, you don't push through pain, you don't push through kind of a bony block, this can be a very good exercise. But we have seen athletes where, again, they're just trying to jam themselves into end range positions. And the spine really isn't designed, at least in the lumbar spine, to handle as much extreme range of motion. So I'll tell you what I mean here. So if we look at the spine, right, our thoracic spine is really made for motion, right? Typically, our body is designed with alternating mobile and stable joints. So our knees are supposed to be stable. Our hips are supposed to be mobile. Our lumbar spine is built to be more stable. Our T-spine is built to be more mobile. Our shoulder is built to be mobile. Our scapula are built to be more stable. And so what we see with the low back is that it's really not made to extend a ton. There's a little bit of range of motion at each segment. If you try to force that, if you force it beyond what it's capable of, a lot of times what will happen is these little joints here where the vertebrae connect, they're called facet joints. And that's where that contact will happen. That's where that compression can happen. And that's where you'll get these stress fractures in the low back. So as we're going through and doing any sort of spinal extension training, just being aware, you're trying to target that range of motion from the upper back, from the hips, from the shoulders, not really from the low back. That can often be the weak link in the chain, especially if guys are taught to just force positions, force positions, force positions. They're just jamming up their low back. They're jamming up these facet joints, and that's when they can run into potential stress fractures and other issues down the chain. So this is why proper progression and coaching is so imperative. Obviously, Yamamoto has been doing this for years. He's been doing this very progressively. He's gotten good coaching on it, and he's presumably not pushing through pain. But this is why it's important to not just imitate anything you see online. Again, this is where athletes can run into issues if they just aggressively pursue a new program without really a clear idea of the underlying goal behind it. Here's another clip I came across where he's doing the pancake stretch. So he's working through kind of the side splits. He's super, super mobile, as you can see here. This is primarily adductors, hamstrings. So this is going to be opening up hip abduction and hip flexion. So this is important for a couple reasons, specifically on the back leg as a pitcher is striding down the mound. If the adductors are excessively tight, a lot of times that can be a limit. So opening this up to a certain extent can help you stay into your back leg a little bit longer. The other piece here is that that lead leg sometimes can be limited by the hamstring's flexibility, or hip flexion. So if that hamstring can't accommodate these certain positions, sometimes that'll limit a guy's ability to properly block with the lead leg. That being said, I'm not convinced that you need this amount of extreme mobility in the pitching delivery. It's not necessarily a problem as long as he has the strength through these positions. But again, you're never going to see a guy accessing full split-like mobility in his delivery. You're never going to see him accessing like that extreme amount of hip flexion in their follow-through. So this is super, super cool. If he lost a little bit of range of motion, I don't think it affects him on the mound. But this is something that if you're very, very tight through your hips, through your groin, through your hamstrings, opening up 5 to 10 degrees can actually really help from being able to utilize your lower half more effectively. The other piece here that we can take a look at is he has a ton of handstand and headstand variations. He even does a single arm handstand here, which is actually insanely impressive. If you've never tried to hold your entire body weight on one arm overhead, if you're 200 pounds, think about holding 200-pound dumbbell overhead. It's actually insanely impressive. And so one thing here is that he has really, really good shoulder flexion. So if a guy's going to be progressed to whole body weight handstand variations, typically what we'd like to see is that the guy has full clean shoulder flexion. So they can get overhead very, very cleanly, if not fully overhead, very, very close to it. Otherwise, if a guy's really limited in shoulder flexion and you just force them overhead, a lot of times you can run out of room and they can actually get impingement in the top of their shoulder. You're just forcing positions on guys who don't have that range like Yamamoto has. So you do need to be careful. Build up to some of these things if you're going to explore them. One example would be just doing a simple downward dog, a yoga downward dog, one way to groove that overhead position. You can then elevate the feet. You can then do different handstand progressions to ultimately build up to some of these things. I really do like them from a stability standpoint once you build up to it. From there, if you're overhead, you're holding this overhead position, you're really having to fight from a stability standpoint. The cuff is working. The scapular stabilizers are working. The core is working. So it's a really good exercise. I've experimented quite a bit myself with different handstand variations. I really, really like it. I'm not as much a fan of the headstand variation here. This is more of a yoga move. The main reason being neck health. Our cervical spine, our neck isn't really designed for this axial load, this same load, our body weight load being put down through the head. A lot of the nerve issues that can present down through the arm can actually come from cervical dysfunction. So I'm not as much a fan of putting load down through the neck in this position, although I am a huge fan of the handstand variations. So some final thoughts on his routine. First off, it's obviously working for him. He's a phenomenal pitcher. He's really fun to watch. Again, one of my favorite guys to watch this past year. So it's working for him. He's doing a lot right. I'm not saying he needs to change anything at all about his routine. This is just for people who are watching and deciding if they should try to imitate what he's doing. I think you just need to be careful. I think you need to understand that he's been doing this for a long time. He has oversight. He has a coach working with him. He's been progressing to some of these things over time. You might need to progress quite a bit and have a much clearer plan of why you're doing the things that you're doing rather than just imitating things that you see online. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that bony limitations do exist. We ultimately have so far we can go with our low back before we run out of room and you start to risk a stress fracture. We only have so far we can go with our upper back. We only have so far we can go with our hips before we start to yank on our hip flexors. We only have so far we can go with our shoulders. And so just thinking about forcing range of motion, more is not necessarily better. And just as you're going through mobility work, it really shouldn't hurt. It shouldn't hurt. You shouldn't be in pain the next day. You shouldn't be in pain while you're doing it. So just a good reminder that some athletes honestly do need to hear. And then finally, one thing I'd like to learn more about is he doing any sort of lifting in his routine at all? Because again, it seems interesting that he's bought in so much to some of the drill work and from the javelin world. He's bought into a lot of the mobility work from the javelin world, but the javelin world is very big into lifting. They do a ton of explosive Olympic lifting moves, heavy squatting, heavy bench press, heavy pullovers. They do so much of this, force output stuff as well. It's interesting that it doesn't seem like he's bought into that side of it nearly as much. So I'd be curious to hear his rationale or understand maybe why he's tended to avoid some of the max strength type stuff and the power-oriented stuff in his training as well. Because again, that does form the other piece of this. It's high force output. It's high degree of mobility to apply that force over a longer range of motion. It's the power output stuff to be able to apply that force quickly. It's also the sequencing and the drill work to be able to properly send the energy up the chain and time it really, really effectively. And that's what makes some of the javelin stuff so potentially effective. So that's the one thing I would say is, the 190-pound, twice as strong version of Yamamoto, could he throw 100? I think it's possible, but I also think there could be a rationale for maybe he's tried it in the past and he's had some sort of bad experience with it as well. So that's all I got for you guys today. If there's other videos I missed, if I missed anything, let me know in the comments. Happy to review those, happy to take a look. But let me know what comments and questions you have for this video. And if you have any future topics, drop those down below as well.